The National Defense Authorization Act may be the most significant piece of legislation in the country when it comes to civil rights, and yet it is rarely even mentioned by the national media, which is why you've probably not heard that the Obama administration may be in violation of a federal court injunction that blocks the administration from locking up U.S. citizens without trial. In our Commitment to Balance News, Ben has the reality check you won't see anywhere else.
The National Defense Authorization Act, something we've talked about for months here on Reality Check. Section 1021 of that bill gives the president the power to arrest and to hold even U.S. citizens who are accused of terrorism or aiding terror groups. And to be clear, this law does not require that the government prove you are working with terrorists. It does not require that you're given a trial and allows you to be held by the government until the end of our war with Al-Qaeda, Taliban, or so-called associated forces, even though it's not really clear who those associated forces might be. Yes, it's called the Indefinite Detention Clause, and it means that you can be held by the feds in prison without one shred of proof that you've done anything wrong until the end of our endless war on terror. The National Defense Authorization Act was drafted by Democrat Senator Carl Levin and Republican Senator John McCain, and the bill not only passed Congress easily, but it went to the desk of President Obama, who signed it into law on New Year's Eve 2011, though the president claimed he had reservations. Well, shortly after signing the NDAA, the White House released this statement from the president. Quote, "I want to clarify that my administration will not authorize the indefinite military detention without trial of American citizens. Indeed, I believe that doing so would break with our most important traditions and values as a nation." The only problem, as we've told you here, Senator Carl Levin stood on the Senate floor and explained that it was, in fact, the Obama administration who, in the first place, specifically asked for that indefinite detention power. So which one is it? Does the president want this power or not? Well, consider this. Early this year, a group of journalists and activists sued the government. The claim, the indefinite detention clause violates the due process clause of the Constitution. Judge Catherine Forrest agreed with those journalists, issuing an 8-page memorandum in which she said that indefinite detention cannot be used on any of America's own citizens, saying, quote, "In the face of what could be indeterminate military detention, due process requires more." Well, instead of abiding by the injunction, the White House has appealed it instead.
But we begin tonight with a tale of two speeches, both from the same man, both from President Obama. One speech that could have been billed as a ballad to the Constitution, a proclamation of American values, a repudiation of the lawless behavior of the last presidential administration, and another speech announcing a radical new claim of presidential power that is not afforded by the Constitution and that has never been attempted in American history, even by George W. Bush and Dick Cheney. Remarkably, President Obama today made both of those speeches simultaneously.
Al-Qaeda terrorists and their affiliates are at war with the United States, and those that we capture, like other prisoners of war, must be prevented from attacking us again.
Prevented. We will incarcerate people preventively. Preventive incarceration. Indefinite detention without trial. That's what this is. That's what President Obama proposed today, if you strip away the euphemisms. One civil liberties advocate told the New York Times today, quote, "We've known this was on the horizon for many years, but we were able to hold it off with George Bush. The idea that we might find ourselves fighting with the Obama administration over these powers is really stunning." And it is stunning, particularly to hear President Obama claim the power to keep people in prison indefinitely with no charges against them, no conviction, no sentence, just imprisonment. It's particularly stunning to hear him make that claim in the middle of a speech that was all about the rule of law.
Mr. President, first of all, thank you for taking the time to talk with us. When you signed the National Defense Authorization Act into law, you issued a signing statement at that time that said you would not use that power for indefinite detention on Americans. You understood the concerns that people had. A judge earlier this year issued that the administration couldn't use those powers because it's unconstitutional. So why are the government's own lawyers fighting that judge's order, the injunction in particular?
Well, look, the basic principle here is, number one, my first job is to keep the American people safe. Number two, we've got to do it in a way that respects our values and our traditions of rule of law. That's why I ban torture. That's why I've argued that we should actually close Guantanamo.
Let me ask you then also about the so-called presidential kill list that's gotten a lot of attention, and this list of folks who have been targeted for assassination. Right. And on that list have been U.S. citizens who have not been afforded trial, including Anwar al-Awlaki. How do you, as president, or any president for that matter, regardless of party or person, utilize that power to assassinate even U.S. citizens?
Well, first of all, you're basing this on reports in...
Last night, RT aired the presidential debate for third-party candidates, live out of Chicago. The debate was moderated by Larry King, sponsored by the Free and Equal Elections Foundation. And while neither Mitt Romney nor President Obama showed up, the candidates spoke about several topics, including something that we speak about quite a bit here at RT, the National Defense Authorization Act, signed into law by President Obama nearly a year ago.
I would have never signed the National Defense Authorization Act, allowing for you and I, as U.S. citizens, to be arrested and detained without being charged. That's the reason we fought wars in this country.
It's an outrage that 1021 NDAA was ever passed to start with. It's an incredible betrayal of our civil liberties that the president has assumed dictatorial rights to put us in prison at his pleasure without charge or without trial. This is unallowable and is a basic offense against the very foundation of American liberty, and it should be repealed.
I should mention this debate was aired on C-SPAN and Al Jazeera as well, but none of the major cable networks aired it.
Mr. President, Senator from Vermont is recognized. Mr. President, there is a war going on in this country, and I'm not referring to the war in Iraq or the war in Afghanistan. I'm talking about a war being waged by some of the wealthiest and most powerful people in this country against the working families of the United States of America, against the disappearing and shrinking middle class of our country. The reality is that many of the nation's billionaires are on the warpath. They want more, more, more. Their greed has no end, and apparently there is very little concern for our country or for the people of this country if it gets in the way of the accumulation of more and more wealth and more power. These people want to cut back on the powers of the EPA and the Department of Energy so that ExxonMobil can remain the most profitable corporation in world history, while oil and coal companies continue to pollute our air and our water. Last year, ExxonMobil made $19 billion in profit. Guess what? They paid zero in taxes. They got a $156 million refund from the IRS. I guess that's not good enough. We've got to give the oil companies even more tax breaks. So, Mr. President, I think that's where we are. We've got to own up to it. There is a war going on. The middle class is struggling for existence, and they're taking on some of the wealthiest and most powerful forces in the world.
Actually, we have great cross-partisan support for the Justice Party because people fundamentally know that the system is broken, and I'm talking about both the electoral system and the system of governance. We have this dysfunctional impasse here in Washington, D.C., and it's all hurting the American people. And then in our electoral system, we know the corrupting influence that money has in our system. It's got to come to an end. And if it means a constitutional amendment, then so be it. We're talking about revolutionary changes. Why is it that not one person responsible for that financial fraud has served a day in jail or prison yet? Right. President Obama received more from Wall Street in his last election than any other presidential candidate. They've bought and paid for both Congress and the White House.
So I think that in our national security situation, we have to assume that Iran is an aggressive nation, that it wants to injure the United States, and is going to use surrogates to do it. Now, if you have an Iran actively seeking nuclear weaponry, as you do, and if you have the ability of that country to hand it off to a Hezbollah or an Al-Qaeda or anybody else, you withdraw from the region, you give them carte blanche to do what they want. Do you not, Congressman?
See, I think you're concerned about the wrong country right now, because more more than half of the Al-Qaeda that are committing suicide in Iraq right now are Saudis, and nobody even talks about
look, I'm concerned about all the things, but when they're seeking a nuclear weapon, when a country's seeking a nuclear weapon,
because no, I do not fear them as you do, as many do, because they want another war. They want to spread this war. This has been the plan by the neoconservatives to have this major overall, this revamping of the whole Middle East, precisely the reason the Al-Qaeda is growing. The Al-Qaeda is growing because of our policy. Our national security is threatened because of our policy, and it makes it much worse. So I see the Iranians as acting logically and defensively. We've been fighting the Iranians since 1953. We overthrew their government through the CIA in 1953. We were allies with Saddam Hussein in the 1980s, and we encouraged him to invade.
All right, so I just want to get
Iran.
we don't need a history lesson, but I do want to get this on the record.
You have to understand.
I do understand the region, but we don't have time to do the history lesson tonight.
You can't. Believe me, we're never going to get
if you think that if we withdraw off the Gulf, if we get our people out of there, there's not going to be any more terrorism, then you're living in the dreamland. You didn't even want to go into Afghanistan and punish those people, did you?
You're wrong, Bill. You're wrong on that. I voted for that, so you be careful on your quotes. I mean,
well, in the debate, you said you don't want to be there. You don't want to be in Afghanistan.
Well, they didn't do what we were supposed to. We were supposed to go after Osama bin Laden. We let him go into Pakistan.
We didn't let him go anywhere. He escaped in there. That's war. That's what happens in war.
Know. But what did we do? We went into doing exactly what Bush said he wouldn't do, into nation building.
All right, let me do. I got one more question. We're in Afghanistan now, trying to have that country stem back the Taliban tide. Are we doing the wrong thing there?
Right now, we're doing the wrong thing because we didn't do what he was authorized to do. The president ignored going after bin Laden, and we don't need to be in nation building. We need to defend this country and defend our national security, and our national security interests are not served by the policy that we're following in the Middle East. It's undermining our national security.
We got it.
Have to come to realize it.